Welcome back to Noise the Avocation podcast. I'm Ryan here with Jeremy, as always.
What's up?
We're going to do something a little different that's not in an interview format today, but this is a conversation that we often have and often run into because running a record store, you often overhear people assuming and thinking and debating and going off of years of what they've heard or what they've been told or what they've been marketed to, that analog is always better than digital. Now, just to state this for the record, we're not advocating that simply one is better than the other. I think we're both in agreement here that they both have their place. They both have the times where they shine over the other. But I will say digital catches a bad rep in the record world.
Agreed. Like, everybody just thinks because it's vinyl that it's better. And I think that...
And they think it's automatically sourced from analog recordings.
Analog, but they don't really understand what they're saying, and we're going to try to break some of those myths.
Yes.
Because we listen to both, because we want to listen to the best version of whatever, so...
And I do want to state that there's no such thing as hearing digital. Your playback, whether it's CD, whether it's tape, whether whatever, even streaming, goes through a digital analog conversion, and you're hearing analog. The human ear does not hear digital.
Yeah.
You hear an analog sine wave no matter what your playback is.
I mean, think about just saying that. I'm listening, like, I hear digital. It doesn't. It's not. I hear digital. No, it doesn't work. Two different formats.
But people all the time just assume vinyl, analog, CDs, digital. Now, there can be records that were pressed from an analog source. There can be records that were pressed from a digital source, as well as on the other side of that hand, CDs that are sourced from analog and sourced from digital. When you get into like the mastering of things, and I always say this, I'm sure we've said it a million times on the show, the mastering and the source recording is what matters most for what you're listening to.
Yep, it's like where you start. And then I would say the next thing is your ears. You know what I mean? And then there's so many other contributing factors, especially when it comes to both of the formats. You know what I'm saying? You need to have like the certain equipment to run each one at its premium level, to really hear analog or digital, because you can have awesome players and you're going to be blown away by both. You can have crappy players and you're going to be like, well, this doesn't sound good. Well, that's because it's a boombox from your grandma's house, 95, like,
or a sound design stereo that came from Sears or something.
So, I mean, that can play into it too. But for the most part, the point is digital is storage. Everybody hears analog. And we're going to tell you why.
Yeah, and I read a quote somewhere, I don't remember where, but it said that vinyl doesn't avoid digital. It avoids digital conversion. But CDs don't avoid analog. They just delay it until the DAC.
That's exactly...
exactly
what happens.
Yeah, which is a really good summary that, and for like, just for layman terms, if anybody hears DAC and they're like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yep.
Like, in your phone, in your stereo, if your stereo is a little more modern or whatever, TVs,
computers, did we say? They're everywhere.
There's a DAC in there built in somewhere. Bluetooth speakers.
Yep.
I will say, getting into this, so we brought some examples, and we're going to do a separate conversation here on vinyl versus CD, so we're not going to get too far into that. This is going to be more strictly just analog versus digital on the surface, just so to avoid trying to capture it all into one little episode where we end up ranting and bouncing all over the place for 2 hours.
Like we tend to do sometimes.
Correct. But in today's day and age, so I run into this a lot at the store where You get people that want original copies of everything because they automatically always assume if it's old, it's analog. Now, in some cases, that might be true, but in a lot of cases, it's really not. So, digital recording has been being used since the late 70s, and it wasn't widely used until the early 80s, but it was being implemented in some way in the late 70s. That Ry Cooder album right here, for example.
This is the first completely digital recorded album, and it sounds amazing.
And what year did it come out?
1979. And it's either like proud of it on the back. It's recorded on 3mm multi-track digital equipment, which rather than molding sound into magnetism in the mode of conventional analog machines, samples sounds at the rate of 50,000 times a second and records its characteristics numerically. Digital equipment can encode and play back from 20 cycles to over 20,000 cycles without noise or harmonic distortion produced by analog recordings. So there's a lot there to digest, but we'll break it down as far as down here at the bottom with what harmonic distortion is and how you listen. But the record is essentially an exact copy of the master tape and was not treated with any equalizing or limiting during the final transfer to disc. So this is exactly what was played in the studio. And isn't that what you want?
Correct. Now, as far as analog goes, people often think that's exactly, they're like, okay, well, this is an exact transfer, and that's not always true. Like, the format of a record, without actually getting too far into this, automatically adds discoloration in the sound. There's harmonic distortion there, and the harmonic distortion is often what people are like, well, you don't get the warmth that you get out of vinyl with the CD, per se.
Right, and they're actually hearing
and
that
they're actually
distortion.
hearing the imperfections and the tape hiss and whatever.
Yeah, I never understood why people always were like, "I love the crackle."
Yeah, I don't like the crackle.
Ugh.
That bothers me
Me too.
actually. So, when you're recording analog, it's a continuous signal that's carved into vinyl or magnetically stored onto tape. You hear in playback what's etched or magnetized, whether it's on the vinyl or the tape. On digital, the sound gets converted into numbers, yes, but plays back as an original reconstruction of the signal without having any type of discoloration, no harmonic distortion. The noise floor is way larger than what on a record is, because in a record you have a beat set limitation to master within, versus CD you can kind of go wherever you want. And we'll get into that more in the vinyl versus CD episode, where we get into loudness wars and everything. This album right here, Donald Fagen's The Nightfly. Donald Fagen was the singer for Steely Dan. This is another one of the earliest fully digital recordings. This was done in 1982. And I've never heard a single version anywhere on any format, although I haven't heard the tape, because I'm not always a tape advocate, at least for cassette tapes. Reel-to-reel tapes I'll do, but...
If we're talking sound quality, though, tapes just fall by... Cassette tapes, portable cassette tapes and 8-tracks, of course, they just fall by the wayside when it comes to CDs or vinyl.
I've never heard a bad version of this. This is the original copy of the record. I have the original copy of the CD. At one point, Mobile Fidelity did a one-step version that had all this, that, and the other on it. That cost about $125. I've heard it and compared it to the original record. That cost about, well, when I bought it, it was like $5. I don't know what it goes for now.
Yeah, that CD's $5.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
They sound just as good and the same as the expensive version that Mobile Fidelity was putting out. Now, to further elaborate on Mobile Fidelity, they're a company that often preaches we use original analog masters, we source from the original tapes. Be that as it may, and be that as it may be true, they're sourcing from the original tapes that were converted to DSD, ran through digital processing, and then put out onto the record.
And to debunk that even more, because there was a scandal, I want to just touch on that. They used it's like fine print. They use the best available master. You know what I mean? Like whatever that may be, which it doesn't mean it's the original master tape. So it's kind of half fibbing, you know?
Yeah, you got to think, and it's a marketing tactic.
Definitely.
Like, we both been watching Mad Men, so a good example is there's a point in that show where Don's talking to somebody, and they were talking about how they don't fall for marketing, and marketing is like it's the man trying to weigh them down or whatever in a sense.
Yeah.
And Don says something to the effect that, like, well, if the marketing's good enough, you don't know that it's being used against you.
Exactly.
And in all things, in record collecting, in cars, in video games, in whatever.
In everybody's daily life, basically.
That's true. You're being marketed to at all
Whether
times.
It's toothpaste, deodorant, everything.
But
dude.
if it's good enough marketing, you don't know that you're being marketed to. So in the vinyl world, we have people and companies that are like, if you put Audiophile on something, if you put original analog sourced on there,
there's
sourced from tapes.
Yeah, there's certain like words that they can get away with saying, and they don't have to. It's not what you think it is.
Yeah, and there's little loopholes and gray areas there. Right. So like this,
I see that a lot in jazz albums.
Yep. This right here is a good example. So this was put out by Analog Productions. Jeremy has I believe that's 80s cut. Was that the Columbia Jazz Master tapes one? Yeah, okay. So at the top of his, it says digitally remastered.
Directly from the analog tapes.
Right. So this from Analog Productions, the hype sticker on here says, original master tapes. We use the original tapes with the work only... and work with only the best mastering studios. Sorry. It'll tell you heavyweight vinyl, deluxe packaging, this, that, and the other, that they use less than 1,000 records per stamper, so there's no degradation in the stamper there. Now, this was done in 1958? Yeah, 58. To have a tape that, because originally, yes, this was recorded all analog. I mean, at the time, that was the technology they had. But over time, they've backed those recordings up. They've transferred the tape to a digital source. This is a very popular record. And to even go further with that, I brought in, this is the mobile fidelity set of Miles Davis Kind of Blue. At the top, you can see it says original master recording. This was done in 1959. Here's the Super Audio CD of that, which are both sourced from, I believe, the same thing. Both sound good. I will say Miles Davis, the vinyl set, has a little bit too much low end added into it, but different conversation.
So I recently, that's a different conversation, but I recently borrowed those from Ryan, and the CD sounds better to me than the MoFi box set. But that is because I have it running through a pretty decent DAC, honestly.
Now, if you look at the CD, when you look on the back, it'll tell you that it was sourced from the DSD transfers.
Right.
Which were the
copies.
Analog transfers that got transferred to a computer and put out digitally. Most records today that you're buying are almost always digital, whether they were sourced from a digital recording or whether they were transferred from an analog source to a digital workstation and then pressed into the record. I feel like they were
a lot of things are digital. Almost everything is mastered digitally, even if it's just a little bit, and then spit back out through, analog.
And there's a reason for that.
Think about technology.
It's a benefit and a disadvantage at the same time. So with digital, we'll start with the analog side. So when you're recording onto tape, you have sort of a commitment where you're like, okay, we got this tape rolling. You guys got to run this recording, and we got one shot to do it. Yes, you can splice the tape and cut it up into different areas, but that takes its own specialists and know how to get it actually to run correctly. Tape's expensive. It degrades over time, etc. Digitally, you can record as many different tracks as you want, as many different takes as you want, which in a way takes away from some of the character of things, because you can have somebody being like, okay, we're going to run, we're doing one verse here, but I did it 800 times.
Do you remember the Boys in the Hood Straight Outta Compton movie?
Yeah.
And they show Eazy-E, and he has to do it, pardon me, verse by verse by verse, and they have to chop.
And they're splicing.
And
yeah.
Imagine doing that now. Your albums would take forever.
Yeah, especially with the amount of music that comes out.
Holy crap.
And you would have to have a specialist to do that. So it works in a way that it's an advantage to where you can go in and mess with every single fine little detail possible. But it also kind of in a way works as a disadvantage, because every artist now knows, I don't have to get this in one take. I can record 1 second of a 44-second, bridge in a song, and I could record all 44 of those individually, and then we just take all the best takes, compile them all together, and it sounds like a one perfect output. So in a way, I think it kind of made some artists a little lazy, but we'll get into this down the road too. But then you have formats like Super Audio CDs, you have multi-channel CDs, you have now what are becoming popular like Dolby Atmos Blu-rays. All of this stuff is digitally processed, and I've said this before, that if more of what I listened to was put out as a Dolby Atmos Blu-ray or a multi-channel CD, I would buy a fraction of the amount of records that I buy currently.
But you prefer also to run that surround system over just like a 2-channel system?
It depends on what it is, but it all goes back to like whatever I'm listening to. But since I have all that stuff, I like to utilize it.
Right.
So, but again, we'll get into that where we get into formats and stuff. Like where I think personally, where analog really shines is in stuff that is like a little more minimal.
Agreed. Like where you want to hear the mistakes almost.
Like a good example is, we'll go back to Kind of Blue. On certain versions of this, I haven't listened to every one because there's hundreds out there. But you can hear the tape hissing, you can hear the imperfections of the background, you can hear breaths, you can hear string slides and stuff like that, and it gives it that kind of like authentic feel where you're really there type of thing. The tape hiss thing honestly bugs me a bit in the recordings of it, but when you look back, you're like, okay, this was done in 1959. I mean, Columbia had those like master tape fires and lost a ton of stuff. So,
and we were trying to figure this out before we did this, but we're not sure which ones were like lost, which ones weren't, and they probably will never tell anybody, which I wouldn't either from their point of view, because again, it's all about the business apparently.
But a good example outside of Kind of Blue is more recently, like both of those Frank Sinatra tone poets that came out.
God. Yeah, he's in your room, dude.
So everybody's heard those albums. Well, not everybody, but most people have heard those albums in one way or another. Because for a while, they were pretty common records that you would see everywhere.
They were $1
The Wee Small Hours was like $1 forever. And then eventually when kids started buying Frank Sinatra, they became a little more pricey. But they never sounded as good as they currently do with that remastering to them. And like Kevin Gray is a world-renowned sound engineer, but he's using analog sources again that are going through digital processing. So it has, like, I don't know how many ways I can say this, but like digital is not your enemy here. It's just people have been told for so long that it is, and that vinyl's the way. And I'm not telling you that it's not.
Like, in hi-fi, I feel like it's one of those hobbies that there are so many myths and misconceptions, you know what I mean, that we'll again get into later. But digital, it's been around since the 60s. They've been, it just
what did we see like the other day? It was 1967 was the first digital recorder ever built or something like that in Japan. So this has been something they've been toying with forever. there's a reason that they no longer really utilize analog, because the storage is massive, the tape degradation, and I know in the comments, at least honestly, I'm hoping in the comments, there's people debating this, because there's going to be the analog side,
Oh,
the digital
definitely.
side, and then there'll be the side that are willing to accept and acknowledge that both have their place and their advantages and disadvantages.
So statistically, 90% of all albums are produced digitally today, and that is across the board. And that makes sense because we can make albums in our homes now.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that 10%. And when I think about the 10% that's still made like direct like that, maybe Third Man when you record live and they do it like
They do
they
those
cut it right
direct
there.
direct to acetate
Yeah.
cuts. Yeah.
Yep. That would,
But I'm willing to bet
but that has to go through a
even
processor
has
that's digital
some
somewhere.
sort of digital
I would
processing
agree.
to it.
Yep. But
Because I have the Sleep Live at Third Man that they cut
Yep.
directly, and it sounds awesome. It's really cool. It's really cool to hear, like, when Sleep is like belting out those like long droney riffs that are just resonating, like you can hear like the chains on snares rattling and stuff.
yeah.
They're cool to hear, but I'm again willing to bet that they go through some sort of digital processing, because legally any company can tell you, like going back to Mobile Fidelity, they can tell you we sourced from analog recordings, and that may and probably is true. But they sourced them through analog recordings that were put through another digital processing. Like that 90%.
I think it just comes down to common sense. If you can do something easier, aren't you gonna?
Right.
You know what I mean?
And you get a better result.
And get exactly.
In
not
some
like
cases.
It's not like you're being cheaper. And it is in some cases. You have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. There's
equipment.
There's records out there. I'll use Boston's first album for example. One of the best album recordings that I've ever heard, and it was done all analog. It was, if you find the right version of the record, it's pressed all analog, sourced everything. In the industry, they call that AAA. It sounds phenomenal. It's one of those records that you can test a system with, that you can kind of, once you learn to know what to listen to, you can play it back and you're like, okay, this system lacks here or there or wherever. I use it all the time as a tester. But then you get into, I've run into this before at the store, where you get somebody that pulls up Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms. And I actually just ran into this not that long ago, where they're like, well, they don't make music like they used to, like everything's digital now, blah blah blah, and it's like very surface level. Like,
it's so hard for me to keep a straight face with those people.
Yeah, and I have to deal with it all the time, so I can't convince everybody one way or the other. But if I see somebody and talk to them, and I like get a feel that they're willing to kind of like accept some new knowledge, because sometimes you get those guys that are like, they learned what they learned however many years back, and they are never willing to accept different information.
There's a lot of those people around here.
Especially when it comes from somebody younger, too. Because I catch a lot of flack where people are like, oh, I bet he knows the new stuff, but he doesn't know anything old. Like, I get that all the time. And it used to kind of bother me, but now I really don't care. And honestly, it's almost kind of fun to debunk that when people are talking.
Yeah, they get mad, too.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to do it to be rude. I'm just trying to do it in the sense that, like, I know what I'm talking about. Do I claim to be an expert? No, not at all. I'm constantly learning new things, but I'm willing to learn new things. I don't just go, I know everything.
Yeah, the fucking old people, at least in this area, that they're a lot like that with everything, not just audio.
Yeah. So maybe I'm willing to, like, a wise man knows that he knows nothing at all.
Yeah, keep an open mind.
I don't know who made that quote, but it's always stuck with me. So this guy buys Brothers in Arms, tells me how it's, you know, an amazing audiophile record, this, that, and the other. And I don't even like the word audiophile because it comes with all this extra nonsensical shit to it. Just be somebody who appreciates the music and the sound. But anyways, he goes on about how they don't record music like they used to, and this, that, and the other. And I was respectfully tell the guy, like, okay,
he's right in a way.
Like, yeah, you're right. But in this circumstance, you're wrong, because Mark Knopfler was one of the first like digital advocates that was pushing for that stuff in the early 80s to be utilized on his music. Donald Fagen is another one. They wanted their albums recorded in full digital because they wanted that extra headroom. They wanted that clarity. They wanted all that.
I don't understand why it's so hard to convince people of that particular album, because that video was huge, and that was the first like CGI video, right?
And even
so
if
why
you
wouldn't the
read,
music be, you know what I mean? Like, why would it be so hard to believe that
right,
the music's digital?
even if you read on the back of it in the liner notes, it'll tell you, just like how that Ry Cooder
Right.
album did. It'll tell you what it was recorded on, how it was sourced, everything.
Which just kind of shows their ignorance anyway. They don't
Because
read
at
back their
that
own
time,
fucking album.
that was new material, new equipment, to where they were like, we're recording space age technology here. It's like Billy Idol had the first CD that was put out on like a mini disc or something like that, or a floppy disk, or whatever the fuck.
Some disc.
That cyberpunk album that he had.
Yeah. The 90s one.
That was like the first CD that got transferred to that. And I say that because they kind of bragged about it being like, this is new technology that nobody else has stepped into yet. And Dire Straits did that, Steely Dan did that, Donald Fagen did that.
Was put it on a different format.
Yeah, like, and they wanted to tell you, like, we're going to the future here. We're using stuff that not everybody's using right now.
I think a lot of where the digital sound gets a bad rep too is like now, like today in 2026, home audio making has come a long way. And I think if you even go back 20 years and people playing guitars and different, like you were saying with Mark Knopfler using it, this dude had like the ability to use the best of the best. By the time it got to people's bedrooms, they're like, oh, I don't want to hear that crap. Hence the old people hating on the young people. Just have an open mind. Things change, you know?
And I think, and we'll get into again later on down in this series, like what you're playing back on makes a big difference.
Definitely.
Too. Because like if you have a good DAC, you can play back some phenomenal digital sounding recordings.
Yep.
You can play back some phenomenal analog recordings as well. Like what I said again, I'm not saying one is specifically better. I would just like to see digital get less hate than what it gets.
Okay, I'll say I would rather, this is a personal thing, and this is kind of funny as it pertains to this conversation, but I would rather listen to albums on vinyl. But I believe that my digital output is better built in my system than my turntable and my preamp. You know what I mean?
It probably is, because there's less components there,
right,
to go through a chain.
And I made sure that I got like a not an expensive like $20,000 DAC, but like I got a decent one, you know, because you want to get the most that you can out of that digital format. You know what I mean? So that being said, it's like you have to take it all in. You know what I mean, to really enjoy everything.
Yeah, and if you're a fan of music and sound reproduction in general, like, we're not telling you anything that you don't already know. This is more just as a surface thing to break that stigma that digital has, at least in the vinyl world. If you enjoyed this, we're going to get into vinyl versus CD. We're going to get into equipment, new versus old.
Gimmicks.
Debunk some of the myths that come along with the audiophile world, as far as like super expensive speaker wire. We'll get into balanced versus unbalanced cables and things like that. So stay tuned for more. Check it out. Like this, share it, comment on it. Even if you have an opinion one way or the other, we want to hear about it. I'm not going to sit and argue with you and try to change your mind. That's why we're just speaking in general here, but we still want to hear about it because it's fun to us to hear other people's perspective on this.
And maybe you know something we don't.
True. You could. But check us out on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. You can listen to any of our interviews on Spotify, on Apple Music, on everywhere you can stream a podcast. And we appreciate you taking the time to listen to this if you've made it this far, and stay tuned and check out more.